Hello there, it's Antrice, and welcome to another episode of the Savvy Painter Podcast. The Savvy Painter Podcast is published every week on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, iHeartRadio, and SoundCloud. If you are a painter or artist who is looking for down-to-earth, real-life conversations about art, how to create it, how to sell it, you are in the right place. Savvy Painter has been downloaded over 1 million times by artists in 150 countries. This is the place where you will find your community, you will be inspired to create, and you'll hear real stories from artists who are thriving with their art. So if you are new to this podcast, I want to welcome you to the Savvy Painter community. But make sure you don't miss an episode. Sign up for weekly updates, free guides, and workshop announcements. Go to savvypainter.com and click on join. It's that easy. This episode is sponsored by Gamblin Artist Colors. Gamblin is a color house of 25 people dedicated to oil painters. They craft materials as they ought to be, not just as they have been. Gamblin's luscious colors and contemporary mediums are true to historic working properties, yet safer and more permanent. All Gamblin products are handcrafted in small batches in Portland, Oregon. So Jeremiah Palecek is my guest today. Jeremiah is originally from Kansas, but he now lives and paints in the Czech Republic. In this episode, Jeremiah talks about growing up surrounded by his grandmother's art and how his family influenced him to become an artist. His grandmother sounds like an incredible person. I can just imagine what her art-filled house must have looked like, and I adore how his father taught him about other artists. Kudos to both of them for being so supportive, and I love how they did it. Jeremiah is currently working on a series of portraits, which are somewhat inspired by facial recognition technology and the human ability to recognize and respond to other people. In trying to describe his work, I mentioned Francis Bacon, which may not be the best comparison, but it sort of gets us in the ballpark. They both paint heavily distorted portraits. They're both playing, I think, with the concept of what makes a portrait a portrait. But I think both the reason for doing it and the end result are totally different. Jeremiah's wife has a different description of his work, which I love, and maybe in the end, more accurate than my own. Jeremiah and I talk about our identity as artists. I get a lot of emails from artists asking about experimentation in their work and how to navigate play, experimentation, and switching styles. Now, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you've probably noticed that there are different opinions or variations on just about everything. This will be no exception, and I have to say that I absolutely love how Jeremiah embraces experimentation and plays with styles. I'm using air quotes there. And from now on, I'm going to be looking at social media profiles and Etsy stores differently. So I'm going to jump into this episode and let Jeremiah tell you his own story, but I seriously love how he plays with identity. Here is Jeremiah Palecek. Jeremiah, thank you so much for being on the Savvy Painter podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to be on the show.
Thank you. It's awesome to be here.
I'd love to hear a little bit about how you got started as an artist. Was there kind of a moment when you decided that you were going to do this professionally?
Well, a lot of it actually goes back to my grandmother, who was an outsider artist and really very prolific. And she had a home down in Kansas, in Republic County, Kansas, which is in the north of the state, just out in the middle of nowhere, no town near it or anything like that. But she was, you would come into the house and there was this nice spiral staircase going up in the middle, and there was hundreds and hundreds of paintings everywhere. Every single available piece of wall space had a painting on it.
Oh, wow.
She had a grand piano and a baby grand piano. And there was just piles and piles of paintings there.
That sounds magical. I want to go to your grandmother's house now.
It was pretty ridiculous. So yeah, she'd paint on anything. She'd paint on like shingles from like houses if they got exploded by a tornado or something like that, and like sand them down and put a paper backing on them. But she did a lot of stuff to sell, kind of like a chickadee or a squirrel or something, like on the shingles. But then she did these big abstract paintings as well. which were kind of out of place. Like she was kind of out of place. And
Mm-hmm.
when I go down there to visit, even from like a really young age, I knew that it wasn't like, oh, this is it, I'm going to, start painting. I knew that like painting was kind of a serious thing because there was so many and they just took up so much space and time and effort, in order to create everything. So I was lucky, I think, in that regard to, even though I grew up in Bismarck, North Dakota, which is pretty isolated from the contemporary art world, to say the least. But, my father would bring home art books every month for me from the library, and we'd have like artists of the month or whatever.
You're kidding. Was your dad an artist also?
Maybe, kind of. He plays the piano. He was like a classical radio DJ, and then he was like kind of a peace activist. He teaches at a Native American university right now.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, he does kind of a lot of different things. And so we'd have a lot of my grandma's paintings in our house, of course, as well, because they overflow and they just keep exponentially increasing when there's not, a big market. So I was surrounded by paintings in that way, but obviously I wasn't connected to, I couldn't go to the Met or, the Art Institute of Chicago or something like that for fun growing up, so I didn't see El Greco until I was like 19 years old or so.
But still, like just the fact that your dad did this Artist of the Month is amazing. That is so cool to grow up with that.
Yep. And they have so many of those great art books at the libraries generally.
Mm-hmm.
So one time it would be, Manet or whoever. I love Dürer, of course, because everyone has to love Albrecht Dürer. It's kind of hard to think he's just awesome. So of course I loved those like dark woodcuts with skeletons and knights and
oh my God, yeah. Especially when you're a kid, it's just like that's portals you into a whole different world.
Yeah, he's just one of those people that's so monumental it's hard to even describe. I know the epitaph on his grave is something like, whatever is mortal of Albrecht Dürer is underneath this mound. So it's like, yeah, he's kind of a rock star in that regard. But I loved him growing up. Just the way he did his name, even put it in that little square. So I copied like the rhinoceros he did and his pillow drawings. He had a bunch of really cool pillow drawings, pen and ink drawings. So I remember, playing with those growing up as well. Very
cool. Who are some of the artists that you feel like have influenced the way you paint? Because your paintings are so, I'm trying to think how I can describe them. That's the only, I think the good and the bad of the podcast is that, we can talk about art and not have it's going to sound weird, but the distraction of the art itself. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it's kind of like when you start getting into things, you want to talk about the art. So who are some of the artists that influence the way you paint?
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about it. I mean, if we talk about early on, kind of that original seduction with a medium, it would probably, it's not somebody like Velasquez or something like that. It would be more like Frank Frazetta, who did a lot of science fiction covers, and this other guy, Enzo Sciotti, who's an Italian guy. He did all those like VHS film covers and stuff like that. So I would see these paintings, of course, and it would be like a police car and a lion or, whatever. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. So like growing up, I was copying a lot of comic books and these sort of things. But I got to play with oil paint when I was pretty young, probably about 6 or 7. My grandmother, started letting me play around with her paints and stuff. I would be left alone. She had this giant table because she'd cook for everybody. But I remember hearing them talk about it after the fact, how I hadn't heard any of the conversation, and they were saying that was so nice that I was so focused on painting. But then I heard them talking about me, not hearing them. So I was kind of
right.
like, oh, this is nice. So I can just keep painting and not listen.
Yeah. You can go into your own little world and it's okay.
But of course, yeah, I mean, Giacometti, when I saw Giacometti the first time, I was like, yes, that was kind of initial Egan Sheila. I think everybody probably
Yeah.
goes through an Egan Sheila moment in their life.
Yeah.
It's like being emo or something maybe, but
Yeah, it is kind of right. But they're
like you
just
have to
so
get through it.
powerful. Yeah. Yeah.
You have to love Egan Sheila. He actually he lived in Czech Republic for a while.
That's
His
right.
studio is not far from here, where his mother grew up. So I've been to his studio here.
Wow.
It's pretty amazing. It's still there. You can tour it and stuff.
Wow, that's really cool. Could you describe your work? Like for somebody who's never seen your work before, how would you describe it? I know this is a very difficult question to answer.
Well, I work on multiple paintings at the same time. So often I begin like very vigorously and kind of attack the canvas, and kind of this whole idea to make a big mess and then try to paint my way back out of that mess.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not afraid to be more expressive in the beginning, and then I do a lot of layering and glazing, so the painting kind of makes itself to a certain extent. I have normal steps I go through that are pretty similar to portrait painting in some ways. Sometimes I'll even start with a master copy and then kind of play with that initial structure to deconstruct it and mess around with it even more, or just the planes of the face, and then start pushing and pulling different forms into those planes. So, but yeah, they look really blobby, I guess you could say that. As well, that's what my wife always says. She's a painter as well, and she's like, "Yeah, you're blobbies."
Your blobbies, is that what she calls them?
Yeah, very supportive having a painter as a significant other, but
Well, you can't get away with anything. That's the thing. I can get away with a lot because my husband's not a painter, but yeah.
Right. Yeah, you'd think after a few years I'd be able to be taken seriously, but still the blobbies. But yeah, they're very blobby. It's kind of these heads that are, some people think they look aggressive or like Francis Bacon, but I don't mean them to be like violent in that respect at all. They're more.
Yeah, that's interesting because they don't look like Francis Bacon. And yet, the first time I saw your work, I thought of Francis Bacon.
Yeah, a lot of people say that.
But then when you think about it, they really don't look like Francis Bacon at all. And so I'm trying to figure out like what, I guess it is just that the way that the faces are completely, they're there. It feels like when I don't know if this is true or not. So like, I'd love to hear your process, but it sort of feels like you started with an actual face that that was recognizable, and then you just go to town on it. Is that kind of a weird way to describe it?
Yeah.
But then the blobbies start.
Yes.
You're going to kill me now. This is going to be a thing,
No,
and your wife
fine.
is going to be like, yes!
She wins once again. But yeah, I mean, I'm often starting, I guess it's not like I wish I could think of his, or Nicola Samori. Have you ever heard of that guy?
No.
He's Italian. He does these master copies, and then he'll paint like backwards, kind of. I think he paints thin over thick, basically. So the paintings probably don't have a lot of archival value, but then he'll like rip out the face. He'll like physically like push through the paint to kind of expose the underlying paint and stuff like that.
Oh, I have heard of him. Walt Morton, I believe, talked about him a lot.
Okay.
I mean, I think if this is the same guy, it sounds similar, if not the same person.
Okay. I mean, there's like one cool video of him like puncturing the canvas, and you see this face kind of like black. But I guess, mine isn't about, I guess I'm not really interested in kind of like this destruction of the face. It's more of, I can go down this whole other path about like computer vision and how computers see and this sort of thing. But my work originally comes from when I first started painting. I was making a lot of paintings of television stills and video games, and I did a series of pornography with no people in it. So it's just like,
how do you paint pornography with no people in it?
It's just interiors.
Okay.
That was a set. They were nice. They were well lit. But I kind of think often in terms of these like series of works, I guess. But with the heads, it's meant to be more about trying to figure out how we perceive people and how our brain recognizes mom versus brother or these sort of things. And what is our initial reaction when we see these things? There's a physical reaction to seeing our mother, and even babies do this when they're little. They have a physical reaction to their mother's face. And now we're teaching computers how to see, basically. Not me personally, that would be nice. But places like Stanford has a big computer vision program. But basically the idea is how to teach computers to see in order to start thinking about the world. So how would artificial intelligence perceive a world, and how do we tell a computer to perceive the world? Because I've heard that sight takes up 50% of our brain power, more or less. It's like this, and where the way we focus on things. I'm sure you've heard of that experiment where you count the basketball being tossed between people in black jerseys and people in white jerseys.
I haven't. What is this?
So it's just a simple thing where you're supposed to count how many times the ball passes from the people in white jerseys to the people in black jerseys. But then a monkey walks through the video and you don't see the monkey.
Oh, because you're so focused.
Yeah.
Okay.
So even this perception I think we have of the world is often tied to these reality tunnels of how we process the world, if that makes sense. So sometimes we don't see the monkey, or sometimes we do.
Yeah, it does. That makes a lot of sense, because I think, I've always felt that we kind of see what we want to see or what we're expecting to see most of the time. And I think that goes for your, I don't know, almost your moods or your perceptions also. For example, if you're in a really good mood and you go out somewhere, you kind of see everything. You basically see what's good. But on the other hand, if you're, if some guy is in a really aggressive mood, he can walk into a bar filled with Tibetan monks and he'll find a reason to throw a punch. He'll find a reason to be offended and feel like So I think that all depends on, your thought process and what you're expecting to see, either, actually physically see, or the responses that you're expecting in a situation.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think we have our brain generally has a really short amount of time to make a decision about how to act in these circumstances, so we gauge. They often say that when we're involved in sight and perception and seeing the world, we're essentially telling stories all the time to ourselves about what we're seeing in front of us. So I think that's kind of an interesting aspect to not only sight in terms of a picture plane. We've got a flat thing and we've got to put dots on it in order to try and make this three-dimensional world go onto this two-dimensional surface. But often when you look at how we're teaching computers, they're going from these same points, and they're teaching computers to see photos and see there's a Christmas tree and a girl. They can see these elements just by the points, kind of like a sketch of that space, but they can't tell a story. They can't tell a story. They don't know that the photo was taken in the 1970s and the girl is sad, or, these sort of things.
Right.
So it's still in kind of the basics level in this way.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because a computer has no history, has no emotional history, so it doesn't have anything to build the story on. Because we build all our stories off of the glasses that we see things through, right? So our own experience will guide us into that, and that's endlessly fascinating to me. I could spend the whole the next 3 hours talking about that, but I won't. Yeah. But yeah, that's just really amazing to me, because you can. For the computers, that's so interesting how they're going to adapt that, because the computers are sort of coming at it with no prior experience.
Right. Yeah, they're totally, or we have to tell them what to do, which is also frightening.
Yeah.
Tell them to see people a certain way or have certain morals or beliefs.
Oh God. Yeah, that is kind of scary.
Well, somebody has to program them. So.
Exactly. It's coming. Yeah, I was just listening to, because right now as we're recording this, it's the start of the graduation season in the United States, at least. So there's all these commencement addresses, and both Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg gave commencement addresses, and they said a lot of really interesting things. But I think one of the most interesting things, especially coming from those two particular people, was that to the kids that are graduating, they were saying that artificial intelligence and robotics is going to be a major factor in your careers, whether you like it or not. So, it's kind of like it's coming and it will disrupt things. And, like there will be a lot of people whose jobs are replaced by this. So you're the ones that are going to have to figure out how to deal with that and what you can create with it, and how to make it a positive instead of like an economic disaster or whatever, but just like that whole concept of computers recognizing and doing more and more, and how we deal with that is really fascinating. Can you elaborate a little bit more on how that applies to your work, like what you're thinking about when you're making these portraits?
Mm-hmm. I basically started with the portrait series about a year and a half ago, and I'm kind of on my way. I want to do 100, and then I'll probably, I might move on to another series or something like that. But I guess in terms of like how I research and approach research and, just stuff that I'm interested in my own work, I don't try to transcribe it too literally, and I don't try to start things knowing what's going to happen, I guess. So throughout the whole process of painting these, I've discovered by having this limitation, like I'm going to do 100 portraits, and just finishing that, I got so much back into just, this is how texture works. This is what glazing is, because it really opened up a whole new, I guess, perhaps I was painting too illustratively before or something, but it really opened up a whole new way of thinking about painting. So I guess when I was like researching these sort of things, it wasn't, if that makes sense, I don't try to like transcribe research directly into my work. Does that make sense?
No.
I don't want to think.
Maybe I might need more coffee though. It might be me, not you.
It's basically like the whole process. I don't want the process to be tainted by this initial idea that I had. Mm-hmm. Like you've heard of or possibly have heard of like the planning fallacy, this idea that it's fun to like have an idea.
Oh yeah.
And it's much more difficult to actually execute an idea. So I kind of like, in terms of painting, I jump in before my idea is fully formed. Got it.
No, that makes sense. So you do enough research to give you a jumping off point, and then you go with it, which is, so you're sort of like actively avoiding the analysis paralysis and not overthinking it and just going for it at a certain point.
Yeah, I think usually things kind of show themselves at certain points, regardless. If you're kind of honestly trying to look at a certain question or not solve a problem, but just think about something, at some point it'll hopefully pop up its head and reveal itself.
Yeah. No, I think it does. I think that oftentimes we don't give ourselves enough credit for our ability to absorb information, even if we can't articulate it, which is why I think personally painting exists, because there's some things that cannot be articulated or put into words. And so we have this visual language.
Yeah. And I think the aspect of play is also important, that we should look at making art as kind of a playful act as well. Mm-hmm. There's actually a Carl Jung quote about that as well that says, the creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct acting from inner necessity. So.
Oh, I love that. I haven't heard that. That's great.
Yeah. So I think it's not like because I often have students and they have to write a statement of intent at the beginning of the semester. And I always think it's more beneficial to actually write it at the end, if that makes sense. But because in the beginning, if you get trapped planning stuff, you're not going to ever like pick up a paintbrush,
Yeah. Or you see that. I mean, I think it's really interesting, like how just, you mentioned that you were going to do 100 of these portraits. So the interpretation of saying 100 portraits, like you see that as what you said, if I remember correctly, was that, I have this limit of 100 portraits. And I think a lot of people would go 100 portraits. Oh my gosh, that's so much. How am I going to get that done? And it's this vast thing as opposed to a limitation.
Yeah.
And so, just even that, going back to that earlier conversation, what our mentality is, our inner mindset is how we're going to perceive even just that. And I think it's really important to note that for some people, 100 paintings is, okay, I'm going to limit myself to 100. And for other people, it's like, oh my God, how am I going to do 100 paintings? But I really like that idea that, I think that statement, setting that intention that you're describing, you have your students do at the beginning of a semester, let's say. Mm-hmm. But then I think it's equally important at the end, you're kind of alluding to it. I don't know if you have your students do this, but to then kind of reflect back, what happened and what did I do? Did I reach that intention or go somewhere else?
Yep. And a lot of it, I think, is also just one of my most successful, I think, conversations I have with students is just about procrastination. And setting goals. Everybody loves to talk about that and the reasons why you procrastinate. I've often heard that you can, people procrastinate and they give themselves a moralistic task.
Give me an example.
Well, they'll think they need to change the oil in their car, but instead they will clean the whole house.
Right. I have never done that.
Right. So they're trying to tell themselves, I'm being good. I'm cleaning the house, this sort of stuff. But the procrastination is obviously still there because they're supposed to change the oil in their car. And initially, I think when you're starting something like painting, which goes on forever and doesn't seem to get very much nicer as you continue, at least so far, is that, your first works are not going to be very good. So it's like learning to play the violin or something like that when we don't give somebody a violin and we're like, wow, she's only been playing for 2 months. This is amazing. They suck for 3 years. Everybody knows.
Yeah, at least. And for 3 years, you're like, oh God, I hope she gets better.
Yeah. So it's kind of it just takes time and in setting goals like anything else. So.
Yeah, I think absolutely. And, something I actually do a workshop that deals with some of this stuff, and it's hard. I think it's really hard for people to be patient with themselves and understand that this whole painting endeavor is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And you have to set yourself these mini milestones, for lack of a better term, where, 100 paintings is a great example of it. If I'm going to do 100 paintings and see where this goes and have some intention of what you want to accomplish. But it's a tough thing because it's with painting. I feel like you have to set your intention, but then you also at the same time have to allow yourself to be open enough to creativity and for things to change if that's the direction that your paintings need to take.
Yeah, absolutely. And just getting your butt sitting in a chair in the studio.
That's the thing that nobody wants to admit is at the end of the day, it really requires what it all entails is getting into the studio and painting. The answer to almost everything is get your butt into the studio and pick up your brush and start working.
It's unfortunate, but
but it's easy in that sense. You just have to show up.
They asked Stephen King. I remember there was a young writer who asked Stephen King how to become a writer, and he said, just write for 8 hours every day.
Yeah.
So, I think he still is known to be this, you look at all the books that Stephen King has written and it's just ridiculous. But then you think, okay, this is a 40-hour-a-week job that he does or 80-hour a week when he was younger, probably.
Yeah.
So, you do 30 pages a day or something, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. And some of them are going to be horrible and he's never going to show anyone, and some of it. And it just, and the other thing too, I read something about him too, that it's just a quick quote for him, but it's basically that he writes every day, no matter what. He writes on his birthday. He writes on Christmas. And so he's had that habit, and I think what's more important than the every single day without fail is the consistency of it. Like if you can't paint for 8 hours every single day for the rest of your life, it doesn't mean you're not a painter, but the consistency is the key.
Yeah, obviously it builds up. Hopefully it builds up. I mean, I know people are also worried about practicing the wrong way. I often hear that now.
Oh, really?
With that they're like practicing the wrong thing, often with students that are more interested in like kind of video games and this type of art. They think, there's going to be I do this, then I do this, and then I can make like an ant creature man, because I studied ant anatomy and human anatomy, or you know what I mean? And it's like, you got to do like 50 more ant humans before they start.
Are they looking for a formula?
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
Yeah. Basically, I think people want that formula, but it's not exactly there.
This episode is sponsored by Gamblin Artist Colors. Gamblin's mission is to lead oil painting into the future. Gamblin has a team of 25 people dedicated to crafting materials as they ought to be, not just as they have been. Gamblin's luscious colors and contemporary mediums are true to historic working properties, yet safer and more permanent. All Gamblin products are handcrafted in small batches in Portland, Oregon. Oil painting has been around for about 500 years, and the founder of Gamblin, Robert Gamblin, believes that there shouldn't be any more secrets. He's dedicated Gamblin to helping artists discover, select, and master the materials that best support their work. So I am super, super excited to let you know that we have a very special podcast episode coming up. You can get connected with Robert Gamblin and the rest of the Gamblin team by joining us for this very special event. That's right. I am going to turn the microphone over to you, and you are going to ask the questions. So if you have ever had any questions about oil painting, materials, how paints are made, anything like that, anything related to Gamblin or the Gamblin Company or oil painting itself, pretty sure that Robert Gamblin and his team are going to be able to answer that for you. So here's how you get to participate. Go to savvypainter.com/Gamblin. That's GAMBLIN. And you're going to see a little box there where you can record your message. You can record your questions for Gamblin and his team. Go to savvypainter.com/Gamblin by July 10th to submit your questions, and you will be included in this episode. So it will be you asking the questions this time, and Robert Gamblin and his team will be answering them for us. So July 10th is the cutoff date to submit your questions. And again, you want to go to savvypainter.com/Gamblin. I am super, super excited to hear what you guys come up with. And I'm so excited about this special episode with Gamblin Artist Colors. So one more time, because I know you're in your studio and you're looking for something to write with, it is savvypainter.com/Gamblin. Get there by July 10th, and I cannot wait to hear from you. How do you do you think you're able to divert your students from that thought pattern of, okay, there is a formula for this? Because I think that's so common. And it's interesting because when I talk to all these different artists, there's so many different ways that artists are taught to paint or draw or whatever. And, I was taught in a very specific and particular way that did involve a lot of, like, this is how you start a painting, for example.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, I think it's important to have something to sort of hang your hat on when you're just learning to kind of like understand this principle. But then there's a certain point when you just have to like kind of throw all that out the window. So it's kind of like there's a formula, but there's no formula.
Yeah. I mean, one way I would say like break them out of it is actually I have prompts. So I'll have, if nobody has something to work on in the studio, basically I have a series of prompts that will force you to just at least start working, like make a terrible piece of art, for instance. And then hopefully, if you really can make a terrible piece of art, you can start talking about what aesthetics you value you know?
Ah, okay.
Yeah. So, and often you can find more. And then if a student wants to do hyper realism, then it's like, okay, well, this is the path and this is the people you have to look at. So you can't, it's a different realm than, or like you were saying, having this more, I went to an academy called the Lime Academy of Fine Arts
Uh-huh.
in Connecticut for a year as well, where they would have, their grisaille and glazing and these steps to the creation of the painting. And I agreed, like, I think that's super important, especially for young people to have, a skill set that they can explode and create something else with, or, that you need a vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like the idea of, often I've heard people that are upset with a lot of art schools because they go to art schools, and I mean, I'm teaching in a new media program, but you can paint in my program, or you can make interactive installations. You can do a lot of different things. But often, if you don't have that skill set, you can't really make something your own, and you're going to be sad. So,
I like that. Is that Jeremiah said, don't be sad. Just learn how to draw. Just learn the foundations.
You're going to be sad.
But it's true. You're going to be frustrated, and you're not going to be able to, you'll see things and want to express them, and you won't have the skills to do it.
And people are used to waking up and doing aerobics, for instance. Like, we don't think that's too weird that somebody wakes up at 5:30 in the morning and does aerobics. Mm-hmm. But, people force themselves to do all this stuff all the time. But when it comes to art, I think it's often so personal that they, that white page looking at them, and I can't remember where I heard it, but it's like, the whole worth of an artist can be shown in one mark he makes on the paper or whatever. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. If you suck, as I know, and my wife knows as well, if you're doing a terrible painting, you're not in a good mood.
Right.
Generally. So I think it's important to, just get to a place where you can kind of at least like, okay, this is my thing. I'm doing this. If it's not working, I can put it away. I can start on something else. One of the greatest pieces of advice I think I got early on at the Lime Academy from Steve Sheehan, he taught there, and he taught at Yale as well. He teaches the materials class at Yale as well. But he just said, always have more canvases than you can possibly paint. Mm. So I've always just gone to, get masonite cut and get like 50 or 60 pieces cut and just gesso them up or gesso them gray. And then it's not a big deal if you put it away or throw it. It costs like $1 or 50 cents for one, so
right. You
can just blaze through these things. But yeah, when people are like starting and they have nice linen, it's like, no.
Yeah, then it's really, and then you're very conscious of then the thought, people will automatically start calculating how much it's costing them to learn how to paint versus not allowing it to be so precious in the first place, because they're going to last anyway. I mean, they're going to last like at least 100 years. And if they last 100 years and somebody, is concerned about the archival quality, then in a weird way, this is one of the best pieces of advice somebody gave me, like very, very late, like long after I graduated from college. When I was in college, like there was lots of conversations about archival quality and keeping everything like, think of the future. Right. And so I was very hyper conscious of that. And that was sort of my version of what you're talking about with the expensive linen canvases and how that can sort of freeze you. Like I would always be like, oh, but if I do that, is it archival? And, and I started studying with this artist, and he was just like, look, Antrice, you're just giving job security to to art restorers in a future generation. Right. If in 100 years your art is worth something, then you're doing them a favor. And I'm like, I'm going to roll with that. I'm going with that. And ever since then, it's been like, just that was for me a very freeing comment. So sometimes like these bizarre, it's not bizarre things, but these ideas hold us back for long periods of time. And if you can just let them go, your work.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember seeing pieces of like Anselm Kiefer's, falling onto the floor in the museum. Like they're just there. There's like a bunch of dust and straw and stuff on the ground. It's like, okay, well,
All right. Well,
that's part of the whole thing, I guess.
it's
So
an interactive. Yeah. Well, hopefully it's not, that. Hopefully I'm not that bad, but
I don't know if he even intends. I guess, yeah, I'm not even sure if he wants his paintings to last or not. Maybe he doesn't even want them to. But I suppose if you stick straw into them, you're not looking for longevity. Exactly.
that's so funny. Can you tell me if you feel like there was a moment or decision that you made in your career that you feel it was a personal success? I think this is something that, it's sort of one of my quote unquote canned questions, but I think it's really important for other artists to hear. First of all, it gives sort of insight into your ideas of what success is for you personally, because I think it's a very personal decision. And then also there's just kind of I'm giving you like this is empowering you to brag without feeling bad for it.
Okay. So one more time, a decision I made, which has helped me as an artist.
Yeah, or that you feel that more like that you feel was a personal success. So it's not necessarily like, oh, I made X amount of money when I sold this painting and that was awesome. It can be something like this thing that happened was a pivotal moment for me.
Okay. I think in this regard, it's kind of like a double-edged sword. In around 2007, I had finished a series of paintings, like all these video game paintings and all these television paintings. And I remember I can't remember where it was. I remember seeing something about how blogs and art writers, journalists, like want stuff to write about.
Mm-hmm.
Like this whole concept that they're looking for stories, they're looking for stuff to write about.
They actually want you to contact them if you have something really, yeah.
So I just kind of went on a rampage of all these different blogs and was submitting my work to all these different places. And this one website called boingboing.net, I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's pretty huge, especially like pre-Facebook and all this social media. They featured my work a couple times on their website. And back then, this just kind of propagated because everybody was taking content from them, so people were writing in Thai and in Farsi and Mandarin, and like all of a sudden, luckily I was on Blogger, so I didn't have to pay for bandwidth or anything for my website. But at the height, my site got over 100,000 views a day, 100,000 uniques a day in this insanity. And I sold everything that I had basically in like 3 days.
That is insane. I can't even, what was going through your mind when that happened? I can't even so you just decided to okay, I'm getting my work out there. I'm going to contact these people. I have so many questions. How did you present your work to them? Did you kind of come up with a story or did you just say, hey, here's my work?
I just tried to keep it really short, and I knew the writers kind of like what they were into. There's this guy, Cory Doctorow, or Doctorov, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but he writes for Boing Boing, and I knew he had written science fiction books before and all this sort of stuff. So I just wrote him an email, and it was like, oil painting, landscapes or something like that. And I was doing like still lifes from video games and stuff as well. And it was like one paragraph.
Mm-hmm. But you'd done your homework and you selected the person that you thought would most likely respond to what you were doing.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. I was looking for people looking at what they had written in the past and these sort of things. But as soon as it only took 3 or 4 hours to find a bunch of different blogs.
Mm-hmm.
And back then you could see they'd have like the attribution links, so you could see the original blog that it would come from. So then you could also send something to them and that sort of thing. But the thing that's strange, I guess, about that is that after you have kind of this insane amount of attention in a way, like I got interviewed on NPR and all this sort of stuff, and obviously it just dies down very quickly.
Mm-hmm. As quickly as it starts it. Yeah.
And it's like literally like 2 weeks and all of a sudden your statistics are back to normal. Everything is back to normal.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of your paintings, you're like boxing paintings, for days and days, which is fun. But yeah, it's a strange feeling to like, okay, what am I going to do now? So I just stopped doing doing those paintings after I sold them all.
Okay. All right. So this is, I love this. This is so great. So I'm going to dig into this. So first of all, I just can't even imagine your state of mind when you're like, okay, I'm going to try. It's kind of like, I remember do you remember there was that movie once? It had Glen Hansard and Marketa. I can't remember her. I can't pronounce her last name, but I think she's Czech actually. But it was a movie that just kind of blew up. And then I believe the soundtrack won an Academy Award. So they're up there giving their Academy Award speech. And Glen Hansard had been, busking on the streets of Ireland and all over the world for so long and just like honing his craft, doing all his work for decades, literally. And he had this band that, called The Frames, which I'm a big fan of. So that's why I know the story. And so like for decades, they've been building and building and building. And then finally they get to, he gets an Academy Award and he's up there and he's talking. He's like, this feels kind of like my whole entire life. I've been like screaming, look at me, look at me, look at me. Hey world, look at me. And then all of a sudden the world turns around and goes, what? And he's like, and I'm kind of left standing here going, hi, I'm here. So it kind of reminds me a little bit of that, where it's just like you're working so hard and then all of a sudden you've got 10,000 people every day coming and looking at your work and you're like, hey.
Yeah. No, it was like 100,000.
100,000.
Yeah, it was more insane even. But no, I mean, it makes, and it's quiet because I wasn't in the US or, anything like Czech Republic wasn't interested. They're not really interested in my work here, so It's like, okay. So it's like the virtual thing that's happened through messages and the internet. And now I'm putting paintings in boxes and it's like moving or something, when you put all your stuff into a box and your like house and you're moving to a new place, you're like, okay,
right.
My house is empty. The paintings are gone. What am I going to do?
And then I think what's really interesting is at that point you decided to change what you were painting. That I think would be a struggle for a lot of people. Cause if you just, you've been working so hard and then all of a sudden you have this event and you completely sell out everything. I think the temptation would be to create more of what you just created.
It should be. A logical person would do that.
But artists aren't logical.
There's a quote in that the movie, the Basquiat movie. I can't remember. I think Rene Ricard or something in the movie says like, "Don't ever tell an artist you like something, or they'll invariably change it."
Yes.
I wasn't like I don't know. Yeah, I didn't think about it at the time, but like after that, at my paintings, I did like terrible. I thought I didn't really like my paintings, after that again for a little while, but then I kind of crawled back out. So I just had to keep going.
Is that because you were changing and experimenting and hadn't quite found your footing?
Yeah, I kind of just felt like the old idea was done, and I'm not going to just be the video game painting guy. So it wasn't like a conscious decision. It was more like, I'm not doing these anymore, I guess. So that happened.
Well, I guess, yeah, it could be kind of like, okay, I've got all this funding now to start a new project. Like that's another way of looking at it.
Yeah. And in Czech Republic, of course, obviously it's much cheaper to live here. So it goes a long way for sure.
Mm-hmm. So then what did you do? Like, I'm kind of curious about, like, I just have this vision of you, like you're sitting there and you're like, okay, I'm going to try this. And then the whole world goes, hey, and ransacks your apartment and leaves you funding. So it's a good ransacking, but still you're kind of sitting, like, I just have this vision of you like sitting in an empty room kind of going, all right, that happened.
Well, yeah, I did. I went straight to, it was right when YouTube started, I guess 2007. So I just started doing paintings of people on YouTube. And believe it or not, then it happened again like 9 months later with all my YouTube paintings.
Uh-huh.
Even like Chad Hurley, he's one of the founders of YouTube. He bought one of my paintings. And so it was, again, another bump of insanity, believe it or not.
I believe it.
So I got another one and sold all those again and just got rid of all those. So it becomes this weird way of looking about paintings, I guess, where it's maybe I'm still trapped in it, where I think of things as a series or instead of, this is my life's work and I'm just going to explore this. Like, I think it's kind of liberating to do a series because you know that there's going to be an end point to it.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I think with 100 heads, I kind of know I want to take these heads out of their little squares and put them into rooms or put them into environments and bring some narrative back into them.
Mm.
See, now I'm planning, so I better stop.
But there's that planning. Yeah, I don't know what that is. It's so like, I feel like I can do it. I just can't explain it. It's like, I will create like hardcore plans. Like, I mean, they are so detailed. And then I start working on it and then I'll just allow, I might get a good idea or I think it's a good idea. Let's just say I get an idea that I want to pursue and I'll pursue that and sort of incorporate it into the original plan. But there's this I put really tight restrictions and then allow for freedom.
No, I think that's the way to go. And also having just knowing that one thing isn't the only answer is nice too. Like I recently just started doing abstract work and that's been really doing my head in more than anything. Just how to approach abstract painting is something I'm just not, admittedly, not too familiar with. Mm-hmm. So I like having those, giving yourself the authority to be like, okay, I can make abstract paintings. Mm-hmm. Or even giving yourself an alternate identity can be really fun too. And just make up a different name and be like, I'm going to make 30 paintings about baseball. Or whatever. And like people at baseball games or something. And like, I don't know, set up an Etsy account, put up a fake picture and see what happens. Like,
do you actually do that?
Me? No.
What? I don't know what you're talking about. It was just something I heard. It was an idea.
No, I like to do that. I like that idea. There's actually an artist named Nikki S. Lee. She was a photographer and she would take on different personalities, actually. So she would marry like what would be kind of like a redneck guy and like take pictures in his trailer. And then she would be like a skateboarder. And then she'd be like a CEO. And she'd just give the camera to people who are walking by to like take pictures of her.
Oh, wow. So she would literally set up a stage like that and then
No, she just became part of the group. She didn't marry the guy. I said that there was a different person that did that, but she would become part of like the skateboarders or these Wall Street execs. And then she would just give these disposable cameras to people like walking by and they could take their pictures. And so it was kind of about her identity and doing this. But I love the idea that we can, have different identities for friends and for parents and for work. And, we don't have to have one identity for how we paint. We can just make up somebody else and paint like a 7-year-old if you want. There's nothing stopping you. Or having a sketchbook you don't show to anybody. I think that's important too.
That's critical.
So like you have to have a place to play and just get out whatever you want to do. Otherwise you get trapped and you make blobby heads for 2 years. So they're the dangers.
I promise the title of this won't be Jeremiah Palecek, the blobby head dude.
Yeah.
Or maybe I will, because then, like for SEO, if anybody Googles blobby head dude, you're going to come up.
Yeah, that's true. Who's that guy who does those blobby heads?
That's the blobby head dude. Come on, I'm sorry.
Francis Bacon?
So with all of that in mind, I'm really curious, what is your dream project? If there were no restrictions on time or money, what would you create? And I have to follow that up with, would you do it in your own name?
Oh boy. Dream project. I'm so I'm very comfortable being by myself and painting and watching terrible movies like Ninja 3. So yeah, it's not very epic. My dream project would just be literally if somebody was like, here you can just keep living your life and keep painting and don't have to worry about health insurance. That would kind of be my dream project, because I feel like I'm kind of doing what I want to do. If I want to work on something else, I'll start on it. And I'm not too bound by scale or materials or these things too much just because I use such simple materials. So yeah, I'm pretty basic in that way, I guess. Don't have some grand plan.
Very cool. Jeremiah, thank you so much for talking. This was a really fun conversation, and I really enjoyed getting to know you.
Thank you. It was awesome to be on.
Thank you so much to Jeremiah Palecek for a great conversation. Since this interview, I've gone back to a Francis Bacon autobiography I read while I studied with Tom Whittle in Los Angeles, and my notes from our discussions on portraiture. There's something about this conversation about identity, how we recognize other people, and our multifaceted experiences as artists and people that I just can't stop thinking about. So I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Go to savvypainter.com for show notes and to check out Jeremiah's paintings. And while you're there, don't forget you still have time to submit your questions to Robert Gamblin or his team over at Gamblin Artist Colors. Just head on over to savvypainter.com/Gamblin before July 10th, 2017. That's just 4 days from now. Your questions just might make it into the special episode. So I cannot wait to hear what questions you guys have for Robert Gamblin and his team. Once again, that's savvypainter.com/Gamblin. One more thing I want to let you know. This year, you can expect a lot more workshops from Savvy Painter. If you are an artist who struggles with getting painting time in or feels like you're always busy but never really moving forward with your art, then my workshops just might interest you. Past workshops include Mindset Mastery, a 5-week online workshop to help you get past the roadblocks that keep you from painting. In it, we tackle the inner critic, fears of artists, and setting yourself up for a successful creative day. The workshop, How to Develop a Relationship with the Right Gallery, helped several artists find the right gallery and show their work. So if this is something that interests you, you can go to savvypainter.com/workshop and get on the email list. This is separate from the main list that tells you when a new episode comes out. This is just for the workshop, so you don't get quite as many emails, but when you do, there's always something really good happening. Sign up now and get a downloadable PDF with case studies that tell you exactly how 3 artists pushed through barriers that were getting in the way of their studio time. You can, for example, learn how Rhonda went from not wanting to call herself an artist to getting her very first solo show. Also, listen to an introverted artist describe how she built her confidence and then spoke in front of an audience of her peers. And you can discover the tools that Samantha used to take back her power after a decade of believing that she had no, I'm putting air quotes there, she had no talent. So again, go to savvypainter.com/workshop to reserve your place on the list. When you sign up, you get that downloadable case studies that I mentioned, but more importantly, you get exclusive invites to upcoming workshops. Most of the time when I launch a new program, it sells out before I ever announce it publicly. So reserve your spot now at savvypainter.com/workshop. Until next week, this is Antrese Wood with the Savvy Painter Podcast. Thank you so much for listening.